After watching last night's Twin Suns episode of Rebels, although it was completely opposite to what I was expecting from the Obi-Wan and Maul duel, I have to say that I loved it, and thought that it was a fitting conclusion to the conflict between two great characters, and a good end for Maul. There was no ferocious battle as I expected, but what we got certainly made up for it in meaning, character development, and just amazing tie-ins and connections from the Phantom Menace and the original trilogy. Let's take a look at some of these aspects, and start with why Obi-Wan was able to defeat Maul so quickly, and what seemed like little effort. The short duel made perfect sense once we realized that Obi-Wan took advantage of Maul's persistence and obsession in seeking revenge against him, and that the Jedi Master understood that at some point, his old adversary would attempt to locate him, thereby forcing Obi-Wan to be prepared for what was most likely an inevitable confrontation. But other than Obi-Wan simply being prepared, how did he provoke Maul into making such a fatal mistake in the opening of their duel, to where he was defeated in only a matter of seconds? Once Maul was getting too close to discovering that Obi-Wan was on Tatooine to protect Luke, and therefore realizing that their duel was unavoidable, Obi-Wan went into the opening stance of the Surisu form of lightsaber combat. However, in an amazing callback to Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn's duel with Maul on Naboo, Obi-Wan switches from his Surisu opening stance to the opening stance of Ataru, the lightsaber form that was used not just by Obi-Wan on Naboo, but Qui-Gon as well. Maul clearly takes note of Obi-Wan's change in form, and adjusted his stance accordingly. At that point, Maul aggressively dove at Obi-Wan, intending to use the same maneuver that worked on Qui-Gon to fatally strike down Obi-Wan. However, having prepared for Maul's incoming strike from the hilt of his lightsaber, Obi-Wan adjusted to where Maul doesn't connect with Obi-Wan's face with his hilt, but rather catches the Jedi Master's lightsaber, which fatally slashed through his torso. Although it certainly didn't have the flash or acrobatics that we've seen in other lightsaber duels, it was a beautiful duel in the way that it represented the entire history of these two longtime adversaries, where in many ways, the duel on Tatooine ended what was started on Naboo. But I have to say that my favorite aspect of their confrontation wasn't even their clash of lightsabers, but what happened as Maul was dying in Obi-Wan's arms. Using his last breaths, and having figured out that the Jedi Master was protecting someone important on Tatooine, Maul asked Obi-Wan if the person he's protecting is the Chosen One, with Obi-Wan answering in the affirmative. This was great not just because it mimicked the scene where Qui-Gon died in Obi-Wan's arms on Naboo, but for what it says about Obi-Wan's interpretation of the Chosen One prophecy. This was a perfect connection to the belief and point of view that was held by both Obi-Wan and Yoda throughout the original trilogy, namely, that they were wrong to conclude that Anakin was the Chosen One, and came to accept that Luke was in fact the one who would ultimately bring balance to the Force and fill this role. When Luke visited Yoda for the last time on Dagobah in Return of the Jedi, Yoda and Obi-Wan were convinced that Anakin could never be redeemed and fulfill the prophecy. Yoda told Luke that once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, while Obi-Wan told Luke that when Anakin had been seduced by the dark side, he ceased to be Anakin and became Darth Vader, thereby destroying the good man who Anakin had been. Further, Obi-Wan implored Luke to confront and kill Vader as a means of defeating the Emperor. Therefore, it's clear that in the original trilogy, Obi-Wan no longer holds the view that Anakin is the Chosen One, believing that he was destroyed with no possibility of his redemption, thereby forcing Obi-Wan to accept that Luke is the Chosen One. It was only Luke, who with his outside point of view and connection to his father, that strongly believed that there was still good in Vader and that he could be redeemed, thereby following what was firmly held by his mother Padme as well. The fact that this was brought into the Twin Suns episode was brilliant, and does so much to set up the important journey that Luke is only years away from starting, and calls attention to the fact that Obi-Wan and Yoda were incorrect in their interpretation that Anakin could never be the Chosen One to fulfill the prophecy of bringing balance to the Force. Finally, I would just mention that Maul's final words of "He will avenge us" in regard to the Chosen One were perfect in my opinion, and is perhaps the only connection to my predictions before the episode. We did get to see some amount of self-realization on the part of Maul that really, at the end of the day, he shares a mutual enemy with Obi-Wan in the Sith. His final words to Obi-Wan foreshadows what is to ultimately come, and even the twisted and revenge-focused Maul understands that those who stand opposite and opposed to the Sith and the Empire, where Maul firmly stands side by side with Obi-Wan, will win in the end. Overall, I loved the episode, and thought that it was a fitting end for Maul. There's so much more that we could discuss, from the amazing voice acting of Sam Witwer and Stephen Stanton, the great connections between the Obi-Wan of Rebels and Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan in the original trilogy, to even the small things like confirming Bail played his role perfectly in telling everyone that Obi-Wan was dead. Although not what I expected, I got exactly what I wanted in the penultimate episode of Season 3. Now, let us all prepare for what we'll see from our favorite Chiss Imperial Grand Admiral in next week's episode.